Have you ever wondered what secrets lie buried in the foundations of our oldest family homes? What horrors were committed in plain sight, recorded only in whispers and documents meant to be destroyed? Tonight, we uncover the terrifying legacy of a North Carolina widow whose influence extended far beyond her plantation's borders, whose calculated cruelty shaped an entire community's destiny. But before we begin this journey into America's darkest shadows, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to help us continue bringing these hidden histories to light. The truth must be told, no matter how disturbing. In the winter of 1851, a discovery in the basement of the Thornwood estate outside of Wilmington, North Carolina, sent shockwaves through the county. What began as a simple renovation of the antebellum mansion evolved into one of the most disturbing investigations in the state's history, one that would reveal the calculated malevolence of Eleanor Thornwood, known locally as the widow of Magnolia Lane. The Thornwood estate had stood for nearly 60 years by that point, its white columns and sprawling verandas a testament to the family's considerable wealth accumulated through their cotton and tobacco operations. After Eleanor's death at the age of 78, the property passed to her nephew, William Barrett, who had moved north to Boston years earlier. Barrett, having no interest in maintaining the property, sold it to James and Martha Holloway, a young couple with aspirations of restoring the plantation to its former glory and converting parts of it into a small hotel. The Holloways hired a team of local craftsmen to begin renovations, starting with structural repairs to the foundation. On January 17, 1851, two workers were examining the basement when they noticed an irregularity in the stone wall. One section appeared newer than the rest, with mortar of a slightly different color. Thinking it might indicate a structural weakness, they began carefully removing stones to investigate. What they found was a small chamber, roughly 3 feet deep and 5 feet wide. Inside were 3 metal boxes, each locked and bearing the Thornwood family crest. The workers immediately notified James Holloway, who took possession of the boxes, and after failing to open them himself, called for the town locksmith. "I'll never forget the moment those boxes were opened," Martha Holloway would later testify. "The smell that came out was unlike anything I'd experienced, like old paper, yes, but also something acrid, something burnt. And there was James, just staring at the contents, his face growing paler by the second. Inside the boxes were hundreds of documents, meticulously organized and labeled in Eleanor Thornwood's distinctive handwriting. Most disturbing were 3 leather-bound ledgers, each corresponding to a different decade, from the 1790s to the 1820s. These weren't ordinary accounting books. They were detailed records of what Eleanor referred to as her marital interventions. County Sheriff Thomas Whitaker was called to the estate the following morning. After examining the documents for several hours, he ordered them to be transported to the courthouse in Wilmington and sent telegrams to authorities in neighboring counties. By January 20th, a formal inquest had been established, with Judge Harrison Montgomery presiding. The inquest would last for 43 days, during which time 87 witnesses were called to testify, including former slaves, neighboring plantation owners, ministers, and members of Wilmington's elite society. What emerged was a portrait of systematic cruelty so calculated that many refused to believe it, even as the evidence mounted. Eleanor Thornwood had been widowed at the age of 34, when her husband, Colonel James Thornwood, died of typhoid fever in 1797. Rather than remarrying, she took control of the plantation herself, unusual for a woman of that era. Under her management, Thornwood Estate prospered, expanding from 40 to over 300 enslaved individuals within a decade. But it wasn't her business acumen that would make her name infamous throughout North Carolina. It was the discovery of her other enterprise, one conducted in secret for over 30 years, From the ledgers and supporting documents found in the hidden chamber, investigators pieced together Eleanor's methodical scheme. Since at least 1798, she had been intercepting petitions for freedom, documents filed by enslaved people or their advocates seeking legal manumission throughout the region. The first testimony came from Jeremiah Powell, who had worked as a clerk in the Wilmington courthouse from 1810 to 1828. Mrs. Thornwood was a frequent visitor to the courthouse, Powell testified, always impeccably dressed, always bringing baked goods for the staff. She took a particular interest in the filing system, often asking questions about how different types of documents were processed. At the time, I thought she was merely a civic-minded widow with time on her hands. What Powell didn't realize was that Eleanor was meticulously mapping the path that freedom petitions took through the legal system. She was identifying vulnerabilities, points at which documents could be intercepted or altered without detection. By 1800, she had cultivated relationships with clerks in 3 counties. By 1815, her network extended to 7 counties across North Carolina and into Virginia. Through a combination of bribes, blackmail, and social influence, she created a system to identify and intercept freedom petitions before they could be processed. But the true horror of Eleanor's scheme wasn't just the interception of these documents. It was what she did with them afterward. The second ledger contained detailed records of what Eleanor called her ceremonies. When the daughter or son of a prominent family was to be married, Eleanor would offer to host a private blessing ritual the night before the wedding. Given her standing in the community, most families considered it an honor. During these ceremonies, held in the plantation's garden gazebo, Eleanor would produce a petition for freedom and read aloud the name of the enslaved person who had filed it or for whom it had been filed. She would then pass the document to the bride or groom, who would drop it into a silver urn where it would be burned. According to Eleanor's notes, this ritual would bind the sanctity of their union to the natural order of our society. Sarah Mercer, who had been a house slave at the Thornwood estate from 1818 until Eleanor's death, provided some of the most disturbing testimony. She called them her marriage purifications, Mercer testified. The young couples would come to the gazebo after sunset. Miss Eleanor would be dressed all in black, like she was in mourning, except for a white shawl. She'd have them stand in a circle around this silver pot. Then she'd read out a name from a paper, always a slave's name, and say something like, "This one sought to upset the natural order established by God." Then they'd burn the paper. Mercer continued, her voice barely audible in the courtroom. The worst part was when she'd have the person there, hidden behind the gazebo. They'd hear their own petition being burned, hear their own chants at freedom turning to ash. Miss Eleanor said it would strengthen the lesson. Afterward, that person would often be sold away, separated from their family. She said it was necessary to remove the contamination of rebellious thoughts. The third ledger, covering the period from 1820 to 1835, revealed how Eleanor had expanded her operations. She had begun collecting information on which enslaved individuals were most likely to seek freedom. Those who could read, those with skills that could earn money, those with free relatives in the North. She would preemptively target these individuals, either by selling them to plantations further south or by fabricating accusations of theft or insubordination that would make any future freedom petition unlikely to succeed. Most chilling were Eleanor's own reflections, written in the margins of her ledgers. In one entry from 1822, she wrote, "Prevented 14 ascensions this year. The ceremony with the Whitfield boy was particularly effective. His bride wept as the paper burned. They understand now the weight of their position. They carry the burden of maintaining order, as it should be." In another note from 1830, she reflected, 32 years of vigilance. Some might call it cruelty. I call it preservation. Each petition intercepted is a stone in the foundation of our way of life. Let history judge me as the woman who held back the flood. The inquest also revealed that Eleanor had kept detailed records of every family who had participated in her ceremonies. These included some of the most prominent names in North Carolina society: judges, legislators, clergymen. Whether they had fully understood what they were participating in remained a matter of heated debate throughout the proceedings. As word of the inquest spread, many families fled Wilmington, some going as far as Europe to escape the growing scandal. Others attempted to destroy evidence of their connections to Eleanor. 3 suspicious fires were reported at homes of prominent citizens during the inquest, all destroying family document collections. The testimony of Reverend Thomas Bradford, who had served as minister at St. James Episcopal Church from 1825 to 1840, provided insight into how Eleanor had maintained her position of respect despite her actions. "Mrs. Thornwood was our largest donor for over 20 years, Bradford testified. She funded the church expansion, the parish school, the cemetery restoration. When questions arose about certain aspects of her character, she would make another generous donation. It became understood that certain topics were not to be discussed in her presence." Bradford admitted that he had heard rumors about Eleanor's marriage rituals, but had dismissed them as gossip. "She presented it to me as a symbolic ceremony about the responsibilities of maintaining social order. I never witnessed the burning of actual legal documents. Had I known..." His testimony trailed off at this point. As the inquest continued, investigators began tracing the fates of those whose freedom petitions had been destroyed. Using Eleanor's meticulous records, they identified 182 individuals whose legal attempts at manumission had been deliberately sabotaged. Of these, 43 had died while still enslaved. 67 had been sold to plantations in the Deep South, effectively disappearing from record. Only 29 had eventually secured freedom through other means. The remaining 43 were still enslaved in North Carolina or neighboring states. One of these individuals was Solomon Parker, who had filed 3 separate petitions for freedom between 1815 and 1823. All 3 had been intercepted by Eleanor's network. Parker, now 68 and legally free since 1847, traveled from Pennsylvania to testify at the inquest. "I saved for 7 years to pay for my first petition," Parker testified. "When it disappeared, I was told it must have been misfiled. I saved for another 4 years. The second one vanished too. I couldn't understand it. It wasn't until my 3rd attempt that someone warned me about Mrs. Thornwood, said she had eyes everywhere in the courthouse, but by then she'd already sold me to a plantation in Georgia. Took me another 20 years to get back and try again." Parker's testimony brought many in the courtroom to tears. When asked if he wanted the remains of his petitions returned to him from the evidence collection, he declined. "Them papers are just ash now," he said. "No different than the years of my life that woman turned to ash. Nothing to be done for it now." As the inquest progressed, another disturbing pattern emerged. Eleanor's ceremonies seemed to coincide with periods of increased abolitionist activity in the region. Whenever anti-slavery sentiments gained momentum in North Carolina, Eleanor would intensify her efforts, targeting not only freedom petitions, but also any literature or correspondence related to abolitionist causes. From 1831 to 1832, following Nat Turner's rebellion in neighboring Virginia, Eleanor's records showed she had intercepted and destroyed 67 freedom petitions, more than double her usual rate. She had also hosted 14 marriage purification ceremonies during this period, compared to her average of 5 per year. The question that haunted the inquest was how one woman, even one as wealthy and connected as Eleanor Thornwood, had maintained such an extensive operation for so long without detection. The answer came from an unexpected source. Eleanor's personal physician for the last 15 years of her life, Dr. Samuel Goodwin. Mrs. Thornwood suffered from severe insomnia, Dr. Goodwin testified. During our consultations, particularly in her later years, she would often speak freely, almost as if confessing. She told me once that her greatest accomplishment was creating a system that would continue without her. She said she had trained others, younger women from respectable families, to carry on her work. This testimony sent a wave of panic through Wilmington society. Who were these protégés? Were they still active? Had Eleanor's death really ended the interception of freedom petitions, or was her network still operating? Judge Montgomery ordered an examination of all freedom petitions filed in the 7 counties identified in Eleanor's records for the period between her death in 1850 and the present. The results were inconclusive. While the success rate of petitions had increased slightly after Eleanor's death, there was still a significant number of unexplained disappearances of documents. As January turned to February and February to March, the scope of the inquest expanded. Investigators began examining marriage records, looking for connections between wedding dates and missing freedom petitions. They interviewed courthouse clerks throughout the region, many of whom admitted to noticing irregularities in document filing, but had never reported them, either out of indifference or fear. The testimony of Adam Jenkins, who had worked as Eleanor's groundskeeper from 1833 until her death, added another layer to the growing horror. Jenkins described a garden feature that had previously escaped notice, a bed of white roses behind the gazebo where the ceremonies took place. Miss Eleanor was particular about those roses, Jenkins testified. Wouldn't let anyone but me tend them, and even then under her supervision. Each spring she'd have me add new soil to that bed. Always at night, always soil that came in bags from the cellar. She'd stand there watching, holding a lantern, making sure I mixed it in just right. When investigators examined the rose bed, they discovered it had been enriched with ash, the remains of hundreds of burned documents. Eleanor had literally grown her prized roses in the ashes of destroyed freedom petitions. Botanical experts confirmed that the alkaline nature of ash would have created ideal growing conditions for the roses, known for their unusual vigor and size. This discovery seemed to break something in the collective psyche of those following the inquest. The image of Eleanor's roses, beautiful, white, innocent-looking flowers, nourished by the destroyed hopes of countless enslaved individuals seeking freedom, became a powerful symbol of the hidden horrors beneath the surface of genteel Southern society. As the inquest neared its conclusion in early March, attention turned to the Thornwood estate itself. What had once been seen as a renovation project was now viewed as a crime scene. James and Martha Holloway, increasingly disturbed by what they had unwittingly purchased, offered to sell the property to the county for a nominal sum. The final week of testimony focused on Eleanor's last years and the question of her legacy. Despite her advanced age, she had remained active in her work almost until the end. Her final ceremony had been conducted just 3 months before her death, for the wedding of Clarence and Virginia Pembroke, both from prominent Wilmington families. Virginia Pembroke, now Virginia Harwood, after her husband's death, was called to testify. At 76, she was one of the few living participants of Eleanor's earliest ceremonies. I was 16 when my parents told me we would have a special blessing before my wedding, Mrs. Harwood testified. Everyone spoke of Mrs. Thornwood's ceremonies as an honor, a tradition among the best families. I had no idea what it truly meant. She had me burn a paper. I remember the name on it was Rebecca. Just Rebecca. No family name. I didn't know until years later that I had burned a human being's hope for freedom. I've thought about that Rebecca every day since. When asked if she believed Eleanor had acted alone, Mrs. Harwood hesitated before responding. There were always other women present at these ceremonies. Watching, learning. Mrs. Thornwood would introduce them as her special friends. They were younger, from good families. They would help with the preparations, arranging everything just so. They knew exactly what to do, where to stand, like they had done it many times before. On March 3rd, 1851, the inquest concluded. Judge Montgomery issued a 96-page ruling detailing the extent of Eleanor Thornwood's actions and their impact. While Eleanor herself was beyond earthly justice, the judge ordered that all evidence be preserved and that efforts to identify and compensate those affected should continue. As for the Thornwood estate, the county accepted the Holloways' offer. After much debate about what should be done with the property, it was decided that the main house would be demolished, but that a small memorial would be established on the grounds, documenting what had occurred there. The 3 metal boxes and their contents were sealed and placed in the county archives. The ledgers were copied, with duplicates sent to authorities in each of the 7 counties where Eleanor had operated, to aid in ongoing investigations. In his closing statement, Judge Montgomery addressed the broader implications of what had been uncovered. What we have witnessed through this inquest is not merely the actions of one malevolent individual, but the revelation of systems that enabled those actions. Mrs. Thornwood did not operate in isolation. She exploited existing prejudices, corrupted legitimate institutions, and enshrined her cruelty in ritual to give it the veneer of tradition. Let this serve as a warning about the dangers of silence and complicity in the face of injustice. The story of Eleanor Thornwood and her ceremonies might have faded into obscurity, becoming just another dark chapter in American history, were it not for what happened next. As workers began the demolition of the main house in April 1851, they made another discovery that suggested the horror was far from over. In the attic, hidden behind a false wall similar to the one in the basement, they found a cedar chest. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to Eleanor, dating from 1845 to just weeks before her death. The letters came from 11 different women, scattered across North Carolina, Virginia, and Georgia. All made reference to continuing the work and the traditions Eleanor had taught them. Most disturbing was the most recent letter, dated just 3 weeks after Eleanor's death. It read, in part, "Dearest mentor, though you have left this earthly realm, take comfort knowing that what you built will endure. The ceremony was performed last night for the Williams-Preston wedding. All went exactly as you instructed. The petitioner's name was Charles Johnson. As his hopes turned to ash, I felt your presence guiding my hand. We are 11 now, each with our own territory, each with our own connections. What began with you will continue through us, and through those we will train in turn. The Order of the White Rose remains vigilant." This discovery sent shockwaves through the investigators. The Order of the White Rose, apparently Eleanor's name for her network, was still active, but who were its members? The letters were signed only with initials, and the handwriting provided few clues to the writers' identities. Sheriff Whitaker immediately launched a new investigation focusing on recent weddings and missing freedom petitions. Clerks in courthouses throughout the region were warned to be vigilant, but the damage had been done. The revelation that Eleanor's network continued sparked a wave of paranoia and suspicion that rippled through communities already strained by the original inquest. Weddings throughout the region were postponed or conducted in secret. The traditional pre-wedding celebrations that had once been a hallmark of Southern society became objects of suspicion. White roses, once a staple of wedding decorations, disappeared from florists' offerings. Despite these efforts, the members of the Order of the White Rose were never conclusively identified. The investigation continued for years, following leads across multiple states, but the women trained by Eleanor had learned her lessons in secrecy and misdirection too well. Occasional discoveries would reignite public interest in the case. In 1857, a courthouse fire in Greenville destroyed hundreds of documents, including dozens of pending freedom petitions. In 1862, a Union soldier occupying a mansion outside of Richmond discovered a silver urn hidden in a garden gazebo, its interior stained with ash. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery made in 1893, when renovations to a church in Charleston uncovered a hidden chamber beneath the altar. Inside were the remains of what appeared to be hundreds of burned documents. Among them was a single partially preserved page bearing the letterhead of the Order of the White Rose and dated 1879, nearly 30 years after Eleanor's death. The last confirmed reference to the order came in a diary entry from 1914, found in the effects of a wealthy widow from Savannah. The entry, dated June 10th, read simply, "Attended the ceremony tonight. The tradition continues, 64 years after Eleanor showed us the way. The white rose still blooms." Historians and investigators have debated for generations whether the order truly continued for so long, or whether these discoveries were the work of copycats or hoaxes. What is certain is that Eleanor Thornwood's legacy of horror extended far beyond her lifetime, casting a long shadow over the South and leaving wounds that have never fully healed. Today, the site where Thornwood Estate once stood is a small, unassuming park. Few visitors know its history. The memorial, planned in 1851, was never completed, abandoned after construction funds were redirected to war efforts a decade later. The 3 metal boxes containing Eleanor's ledgers remain in the North Carolina State Archives, available to researchers by special permission only. The cedar chest and its letters were lost in 1954 when floodwaters damaged the storage facility where they were kept. As for the roses that grew from the ashes of burned freedom petitions, they were dug up and destroyed during the demolition of the estate. But local legend claims that white roses still occasionally appear on the grounds, growing wild in places where no one planted them, their roots reaching deep into soil, still tainted with the ash of destroyed hopes. Some say that on certain nights, particularly before weddings of prominent local families, a figure in black with a white shawl can be seen walking the perimeter of where the gazebo once stood. Others claim to have heard the sound of papers burning, accompanied by the faint recitation of names of those whose petitions for freedom were turned to ash in Eleanor Thornwood's silver urn. Is it possible that Eleanor's network, her Order of the White Rose, continued in secret for generations? Could it still exist today, adapting its methods to modern times, but maintaining its fundamental purpose of preserving social hierarchies through ritual and manipulation? Consider the unexplained disappearances of civil rights petitions throughout the 1950s and 60s. Think about the suspicious courthouse fires that have destroyed records in 7 southern counties since 1900. Remember the strange case from 2006, when a researcher investigating historical freedom petitions found her work mysteriously deleted, her backups corrupted and white rose petals scattered across her desk. The truth may never be fully known. Eleanor Thornwood took many secrets to her grave. But one thing is certain: the horror she created didn't die with her. It lives on in the systems she corrupted, in the traditions she warped, and in the possibility that somewhere, even now, her disciples continue her work. The final entry in Eleanor's 3rd ledger, written just months before her death, may be the most chilling of all. It reads, "They think death will stop me. They are wrong. What I have built will outlive me by centuries. The order will continue. The roses will bloom. And those who would upset the natural order will find their hopes reduced to ash, their names forgotten, their petitions burned. This is my legacy. This is my immortality." As we close this chapter of American darkness, remember that evil rarely dies completely. It adapts, it hides, it waits, and sometimes it blooms again, beautiful and white, nourished by the ashes of destroyed dreams. Look around your own community. Notice the traditions whose origins have been forgotten. Observe the power structures that persist without explanation. Listen for the names that go unspoken, the documents that go missing, the roses that grow where none were planted. And perhaps, Before your next celebration, check carefully who offers to bless it and what exactly they're asking you to burn. May God and Jesus Christ guide your steps through this darkness. Remember, only through faith can we truly hope to overcome the legacies of evil that haunt our nation's history. What happened to the records of those whose freedom was denied? How many lives were irrevocably altered by one woman's cruel obsession? The investigation into Eleanor Thornwood's Order of the White Rose continues to this day, with researchers uncovering new connections in archives across the American South. Before we conclude this dark chapter in our nation's history, remember to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing these forgotten stories to light. 1876 marked the 25th anniversary of the original Thornwood inquest. A commemorative article in the Wilmington Daily Herald sparked renewed interest in the case. Journalist Edward Calloway spent 6 months investigating what had become of the individuals identified in Eleanor's ledgers. The human cost of Eleanor Thornwood's actions cannot be calculated, Calloway wrote. Each intercepted petition represents not just one person denied freedom, but generations affected by that denial. Children born into bondage who might have been free, families kept separated, talents and dreams suppressed. The ripples of her cruelty continue to spread outward through time. Calloway managed to locate 17 descendants of people named in the ledgers. Their stories formed the heart of his 12-part series, The Legacy of Ash. Most haunting was his interview with Maria Johnson, granddaughter of Charles Johnson, the man whose petition was burned at the first ceremony conducted after Eleanor's death. "My grandfather never stopped talking about his petition," Maria told Calloway. "Even after emancipation, when he was legally free, he would say, 'That's not the same as having your petition granted. That's not the same as the law acknowledging you deserved freedom all along.' He would have nightmares about fire, about paper burning, about a woman in black watching him through flames." Calloway's investigation revealed another disturbing aspect of the case, the fate of the Thornwood estate grounds. Despite the county's intention to create a memorial, the land had instead been sold in 1868 to private owners who had no knowledge of its history. By 1876, a girls' finishing school stood on the site. Most troubling was Calloway's discovery that the school featured a garden society called the White Rose Circle, where young women from prominent families learned flower arranging and the social graces necessary for proper society ladies. The coincidence seemed too striking to ignore. Calloway's final article ended with a warning. While we cannot prove the continued existence of Eleanor's order, we must acknowledge the persistence of the systems she sought to protect. The methods may change, but the impulse to preserve power at the expense of others' freedom remains. The most dangerous legacy of Eleanor Thornwood may not be her specific rituals, but the mindset they embodied, that some dreams must be sacrificed so others can maintain their position. In 1922, historian Margaret Wilson discovered a collection of letters in the attic of her recently purchased home in Raleigh. The correspondence, dating from 1860 to 1875, was between a woman identified only as E.T.'s faithful student and various prominent families throughout North Carolina. The letters made veiled references to pre-wedding traditions and purification ceremonies that bore striking similarities to Eleanor's practices. Most alarming was the writer's reference to adapting our methods to changing times, following the Civil War and emancipation. "With petitions no longer our concern," one letter read, "we must turn our attention to other documents that might upset the proper order. Property deeds, voter registrations, educational certificates. The principle remains the same. What is written can be unwritten. What is recorded can be erased." Wilson's discovery suggested that the order had indeed survived, evolving its tactics to maintain racial hierarchies even after slavery's abolition. Her research pointed to possible connections between the order and the rise of voter suppression tactics in the 1880s and 90s. In 1958, during the early years of the civil rights movement, activist James Perkins was researching historical precedents for document suppression when he came across references to the Thornwood case. His subsequent investigation uncovered patterns of missing court filings, disappearing voter registrations, and lost property deeds affecting primarily African American citizens in the same 7 counties where Eleanor's network had operated a century earlier. Perkins documented 43 cases where official records related to civil rights complaints had vanished from courthouses between 1954 and 1958. In 12 of these instances, white roses had been found on the clerks' desks the mornings after the disappearances. When Perkins published his findings in a small activist newspaper, his office was broken into the following night. Nothing was stolen except his research materials on the Thornwood case. On his desk was left a single white rose. Perkins abandoned his investigation shortly afterward. In a brief note to fellow activists, he wrote only, "Some traditions run too deep to expose. Some networks are too well protected to challenge. I have a family to consider." The most recent confirmed connection to the Thornwood legacy came in 2011, when renovations to an antebellum mansion outside Durham uncovered a hidden room beneath the main staircase. Inside was a silver urn matching the description of the one used in Eleanor's ceremonies, along with a leather-bound book. The book contained names, dates, and the types of documents purified in ceremonies from 1974 to 2004. Unlike Eleanor's detailed ledgers, this book contained only codes and initials, making identification of specific cases impossible. However, the dates corresponded with documented instances of missing records related to everything from school desegregation to housing discrimination complaints. The current owner of the mansion, who requested anonymity, reported that upon making the discovery, she began receiving unmarked envelopes containing white rose petals. After the 3rd such delivery, she donated the items to the State Historical Society and refused further comment. Dr. Eliza Morales, professor of American Studies at Duke University and leading expert on the Thornwood case, believes the order may have splintered into multiple groups over time, some maintaining the original focus on document suppression, while others preserved only the ritualistic aspects without understanding their origin. What makes the Thornwood legacy so insidious is how it blended the practical document destruction with the symbolic wedding ceremonies and white roses. Dr. Morales explained in a 2018 interview, this allowed parts of the tradition to continue even among those who may not have fully understood its purpose. A ritual can persist long after its original meaning is forgotten. Dr. Morales points to the curious tradition that emerged in certain southern communities in the mid-20th century, where brides would burn a piece of paper containing past worries the night before their weddings. While seemingly innocuous, the ritual's resemblance to Eleanor's ceremonies raises disturbing questions about cultural memory and the ways in which horrific practices can be sanitized and preserved through tradition. The most frightening aspect of the Thornwood case isn't the possibility that the order still exists in its original form, Dr. Morales concluded. It's the realization that Eleanor's methods, the strategic disappearance of documents, the ritualized reinforcement of social hierarchies, the use of ceremony to normalize oppression, have become embedded in our institutions, outliving their creator by generations. As our investigation concludes, we're left with more questions than answers. Did Eleanor Thornwood's Order of the White Rose truly continue after her death? Does some version of it exist today? Or did it simply inspire countless imitators who recognized the power of her methods? Perhaps most unsettling is the possibility that Eleanor's greatest achievement was creating a system so effective it no longer needed an organized group to perpetuate it. The mechanisms she established, the strategic loss of documents, the protection of power through social ritual, the use of beauty, white roses, to mask ugly intentions, became self-sustaining, adopted and adapted by those seeking to maintain hierarchies across generations. The last verified reference to the order comes from a deathbed confession in 1997. Catherine Blackwood, a 92-year-old former librarian from a prominent Wilmington family, summoned a local historian to her bedside and handed over a small ivory box. Inside was a dried white rose and a handwritten list of 11 names, purportedly the identities of Eleanor's original disciples. Blackwood claimed her grandmother had been one of them and had passed down the secret on her own deathbed in 1943. The ceremonies stopped in the 1970s, Blackwood whispered, but the network never died. It just changed form. They don't burn papers anymore. They have other methods now. When pressed for details, Blackwood would say only, "Look for the roses." They always leave their signature, 150 years, and they still can't resist leaving roses. Blackwood died that night. The list of names she provided led researchers to prominent families across the South, but no conclusive evidence linking them to document destruction was ever found. As with so much of the Thornwood case, we are left to wonder which parts of the story are historical fact and which have grown into legend. Perhaps that uncertainty is itself part of Eleanor's legacy. The seeds of doubt she planted continue to bloom, generation after generation. What remains undisputed is that Eleanor Thornwood created a system of document suppression that effectively denied freedom to nearly 200 enslaved individuals. She wrapped her cruelty in ritual and tradition, making participants complicit while obscuring the true nature of their actions. And she created a network that potentially outlived her by decades, possibly centuries. As you consider this dark chapter of American history, remember that documents are more than paper. They are the physical embodiment of hopes, rights, and identities. Their destruction is not merely a crime against property, but against humanity itself. The next time you encounter an unexplained gap in historical records, a convenient clerical error in official documentation, or a tradition whose origins seem suspiciously vague, perhaps you should look for white roses growing nearby. They thrive in soil enriched with ash, the remains of burned hopes and destroyed dreams. And if you're invited to participate in a purification ceremony before a wedding, pay close attention to what exactly you're being asked to burn. For Eleanor Thornwood's legacy teaches us that evil rarely announces itself as such. It comes bearing gifts, draped in tradition and wrapped in beautiful flowers. It asks for small complicity at first, just dropping a paper into flames, just looking the other way, just accepting that some documents must occasionally go missing for the greater good. The horror of Eleanor Thornwood is not that she was a monster. It's that she created a system that turned ordinary people into accomplices in monstrous acts. And that system may still be with us, hiding in plain sight, beautiful and poisonous as the white roses that grow from ashes. Trust in the Lord Jesus Christ, for only through faith can we find the courage to confront such darkness and work toward true freedom and justice for all.